The sound arrives before the disaster. Not a scream, not an explosion, just a deep vibration that seems to rise from somewhere beneath reality itself. Witnesses would later describe it as a noise that didn't feel like sound at all. It felt alive. Then people began disappearing. Entire communities abandoned their homes. And those who followed the source of the noise never returned. What could create a sound powerful enough to terrify everyone who heard it? And why does the mystery remain unsolved to this day? Tonight, we descend into one of the strangest phenomena ever recorded. The sound begins not as a roar, but as a deep, rhythmic vibration in the earth that rattles teeth and shatters window panes. It is 3:10 in the afternoon on May 31st, 1889. 20 million tons of water, held back by a fragile earthen barrier that has been rotting for years, suddenly decide they have had enough. The South Fork Dam does not merely break, it disintegrates. A liquid wall, 40 feet high and traveling at 40 miles per hour, descends upon the valley of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. There is no time to run, no time to climb, and certainly no time to pray. Within 10 minutes, a bustling industrial city will be erased from the map, replaced by a churning, dark soup of debris, splintered homes, and thousands of lost souls. The sky turns a bruised, sickly violet as the atmosphere itself seems to recoil from the carnage below. You are witnessing the moment civilization is swallowed by the insatiable appetite of a landscape pushed beyond its limit. Behind this catastrophe lies a story of arrogance, neglect, and a misplaced sense of security. To understand how such an immense volume of water could simply delete a city, we must look at the men who built the dam. It was originally constructed to feed the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal, but by the late 19th century, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, an elite group of wealthy industrialists, took ownership of the site. They transformed the reservoir into a private playground for the likes of Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick. They raised the dam to create a deeper lake for boating, yet they drastically weakened the structure in the process. They removed original discharge pipes, installed fish screens that would later trap debris, and, most fatally, narrowed the spillway. They treated the dam as an aesthetic feature for their leisure, rather than a vital piece of infrastructure protecting the lives of thousands downstream. For years, the people of Johnstown lived under the looming shadow of this private lake. Locals often looked up at the mountains with a gnawing sense of unease. They spoke of the dam in whispers, noting how the water sometimes lapped dangerously close to the crest during heavy rain. The engineers of the club, however, scoffed at these concerns. They insisted the structure was as solid as the bedrock it sat upon. They ignored the fact that the valley had experienced record-breaking rainfall throughout the spring of 1889. The ground was saturated, the streams were swollen, and the reservoir was already straining against its man-made prison. Like an AI reconstruction of a ticking time bomb, the tension builds through the sheer weight of the statistics. Every inch of rising water represents a mounting debt that nature is preparing to collect in full. As the morning of May 31st progressed, the water level reached a critical point. Telegraph wires buzzed with frantic messages from the dam site to the city. The operators, however, had sent so many warnings in the past that proved false that the citizens of Johnstown had become desensitized to the danger. When the final warning arrived, the dam is failing, move to high ground, many people simply ignored it. They went about their business, pouring coffee, finishing chores, and children played in the streets, oblivious to the fact that the clock had already run out. The silence in the valley was heavy, thick with humidity and the smell of impending doom. It is the classic anatomy of a disaster, a combination of technological hubris and the fundamental human inability to process a catastrophe until it is already breathing down our necks. The breach began at the center of the embankment. At first, it was a trickle, a dark weep of water carving a path through the sodden earth. Within seconds, that trickle widened into a gaping, jagged mouth. The entire face of the dam slumped forward, collapsing inward as if pulled by a subterranean force. The water did not spill, it charged. It caught up massive oak trees, entire houses, and heavy iron machinery, churning them into a lethal slurry that acted like a giant scythe. As this wall of pressure plowed downward, it gathered speed. It did not just destroy, it obliterated. It tore the foundations from beneath the homes, grinding timber against rock until the city was essentially being digested by the force of its own reservoir. Now, we enter those final agonizing 10 minutes. The sound becomes a physical presence, a grinding metallic shriek that drowns out all human screams. In the center of the city, the telegraph office is swept away in a blur of motion. The AI reconstruction reveals a nightmare of architecture bowing to fluid dynamics. Roofs are ripped from walls like loose shingles. Families huddled in attics are launched into the current, their homes becoming coffins before they even hit the water. The force is so absolute that it moves trains, lifting locomotives weighing tons and tossing them aside like toys. There is no resistance possible against such a concentrated kinetic energy. The water is a dark, swirling mass of debris, a chaotic collage of the lives that existed only moments ago. By the time the flow reaches the stone bridge at the edge of town, the destruction is complete. The bridge acts as a horrific filter, catching the mountain of debris and preventing it from drifting further downstream. This pile of wreckage, saturated with fuel from broken lamps and stoves, immediately catches fire. The water, the wood, and the flames create a surreal hellscape. People are trapped between the crushing weight of the water and the suffocating heat of the pyre. In the span of a few heartbeats, the Johnstown that existed in the morning is gone. There is no way to calculate the sheer scale of the erasure as the water begins to recede, leaving behind a landscape that looks more like a scarred battlefield than a place where humans once lived. As the sun begins to set on the ruins, the silence that descends is more terrifying than the roar. The air is stagnant, heavy with the scent of wet soil and charred wood. Where streets once thrived, there is only a thick, gray layer of silt covering everything. The geography itself has changed. Hillsides are stripped bare, and the path of the flood is marked by a deep, hollow scar where the earth was scoured down to the bedrock. There is no sign of the grand houses or the bustling storefronts. Only the occasional piece of furniture or a child's toy pokes out from the mud, remnants of lives that were interrupted in the middle of a sentence. The city is a ghost of its former self, a hollow shell standing in the mud of a valley that suddenly feels far too small. The investigation that followed this event lasted for years, yet it led to no accountability for the members of the club. They were powerful men, shielded by wealth and influence, and the legal system of the era was not designed to hold such titans to account for a tragedy caused by their negligence. The dam was never rebuilt. The site remains a quiet, haunting monument to that afternoon, a place where the trees have reclaimed the empty space where the reservoir once sat. It serves as a reminder of how quickly the structures we build and the security we take for granted can be undone by a single moment of catastrophic failure. The history of Johnstown is written in the silence of the mud, a story of 20 million tons of water that proved exactly how fragile our civilization truly is when it ignores the warnings written in the landscape. If this glimpse into the mechanics of history and the shadows of the past has left you wanting to uncover more hidden chapters of our world, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to Fact Harbor, where we continue to pull back the veil on the events that shaped our reality. Your support ensures that these stories, no matter how quiet or forgotten, are never truly lost to time. We will see you in the next investigation. Yet, while the collapse of the South Fork Dam remains one of the most poignant examples of man-made catastrophe, it is far from an isolated incident in the ledger of human history. The arrogance of engineering, when coupled with the blind pursuit of leisure or profit for the elite, has carved similar scars across the globe time and again. We must consider the structural failures that persist not just in physical dams, but in the social contracts we draft to preserve our safety. The tragedy in Pennsylvania was not merely a mechanical failure of an earthen wall, it was a societal failure of perception. The men at the club viewed the dam as a private convenience, a playground for their private retreat, failing to grasp that their manipulation of the landscape had tethered their fate to the lives of thousands downstream. This is a recurring nightmare in the timeline of industrial development. History is littered with instances where the convenience of the few has been purchased with the security of the many, often under the guise of progress or necessity. Consider the rapid expansion of the 19th century mining town. where massive tailings piles were stacked precariously above unsuspecting residential communities. Much like the dam, these piles were ignored, rationalized as stable by those who stood to gain from the minerals beneath them, until gravity and rain inevitably conspired to bring them down. The lessons are consistent, yet the human capacity to ignore them remains equally constant. We tend to view our current infrastructure as permanent, a testament to our advancement, forgetting that every structure is in a constant state of decay, fighting a losing battle against the relentless entropy of nature. The silence that now hangs over the valley of the Little Kanma is a meditative space. It forces us to confront the reality that our civilization is not a monolith, but a fragile tapestry. When we look at the ruins of the past, we are often looking at the failure of communication and the success of apathy. In the case of the Johnstown disaster, the warnings were present, whispered in the erosion of the dam face and the complaints of local engineers, but those warnings were silenced by the stature of those who owned the water. When we talk about the fragility of civilization, we are really talking about the fragility of our collective memory. We forget the disasters of the past because we want to believe that we are smarter, that our materials are stronger, and that our systems of governance are more robust than those of our ancestors. But the reality is that the laws of physics do not evolve to accommodate our ego. We must also look at how these events shape the subsequent generations. The trauma of the flood did not end when the water receded. It lived on in the stories told by the survivors, in the way the town rebuilt itself with a lingering suspicion of the hills that loomed above. This is the sociological shadow of catastrophe. It changes the way a community interacts with its environment. In the wake of the failure, the town of Johnstown became a symbol of resilience. But that resilience was forged in the heat of profound betrayal. The survivors had to rebuild not just their homes, but their faith in the idea that they were protected by their society. It is a haunting realization that frequently, the most vital lessons of history are written in the blood of those who were least responsible for the disaster. As we look toward the future, we find ourselves surrounded by new challenges that mirror the old ones. Our modern world is built on a network of infrastructure, power grids, digital networks, and chemical storage facilities that are just as susceptible to the same kind of catastrophic failure as that earthen dam. The difference today is the scale of the potential impact. We are no longer dealing with a localized flood in a valley, but with interconnected systems that, if compromised, can trigger cascading failures across continents. The hubris of the industrialists at the turn of the century is now mirrored in our reliance on complex technologies that we barely understand. We assume that because everything is working today, it will continue to work tomorrow, ignoring the silent stress fractures forming in the foundations of our digital and ecological systems. It is easy to point fingers at the past and judge the men of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club for their negligence. It is much harder to look at our own lives and ask what structures we are ignoring. What are the warnings we choose to tune out because they are inconvenient or because they complicate our ambitions? What are the dams we are currently building or allowing others to build that threaten to wash away the peace of mind of those living in our shadow? History is not a distant, static thing. It is a living cycle of cause and effect that demands our constant vigilance. By exploring these events, we are not merely recounting tragedies for the sake of morbid curiosity. We are performing an autopsy on the decisions that failed so that we might develop better instincts for the future. The mud of the valley may have dried long ago, but the lesson is as wet and raw today as it was in 1889. We are the stewards of our own safety. And when we defer that responsibility to the wealthy or the powerful without demanding accountability, we are merely waiting for the water to crest the wall. As you reflect on the story of the flood, know that every structure we inhabit, whether it is physical or societal, requires the stewardship of the many, not the neglect of the few. The silence of the mountain is not just an end, it is a question, asking us if we have learned to listen to the landscape before it speaks in the language of disaster. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the shadows of our past. May this knowledge serve as a beacon, guiding us toward a more awakened and cautious future.